Thanks for joining us today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about value stream maps and process mapping. If you've been invited to a meeting with us on helping to map out both value stream and process mapping tasks at the same time. You may hear it called key business process mapping, and there's a few things you can do to help prepare better for these meetings. So the first thing we're going to cover is a little bit of the different types of maps we'll be talking about and how those incorporate all the way into the different map that we'll be doing as part of your event. So first things first, there's two different types of maps out there that you might hear used interchangeably. The first one is a process map, and that is a little bit more of a detailed information on how the process flow actually works. We also have what we call a high-level value stream map. And a value stream map actually maps out the way that the material moves or the information flow moves at a very, very high level view across the process. So let's say from when the customer actually would order something to when it's actually delivered in these cases. So if I take a look at the level of detail we have in each of these maps, and again, like I said, you may hear them used interchangeably, so it's always best to ask how much detail do we actually need on here in these cases. So from a value stream map perspective, those are really the high level kind of 5 to 7 boxes that bring value to the product or to the end product or to the customer in these cases. So I always like to use personal examples in these situations or non-business examples. So I always like to think of it of running a marathon. So from a value stream map perspective, my steps might be to decide I want to run a marathon, pick a marathon I want to run, train for the marathon, run the marathon, and then since I'm from Wisconsin, drink beer after the marathon in these cases. So those would be the 5 to 7 high level key business processes that I would be running as part of my value stream map. So that would simply go here in boxes A, B, C, D, and in this case, E, since I've got 5 steps there. So very, very high level view. You might see that associated with the times of each of those steps, how much wait time might be in between them, and there might be other metrics associated with those value stream maps like accuracy or percentage of on-time delivery, that type of information you might typically see on a value stream map. It's very difficult to start right there at the very, very top because as humans, we like to just love to get into the information and the detail, which is much more where process maps come into play. So process maps provide a little bit more information, actually enough information for you to be able to perform a process that is part of the overall value stream map. So if I were to take the box on our value stream maps, in this case, it would likely be box C, which would be to train for the marathon. There might be multiple maps underneath that specific box. So we might have a process map for strength training. We might have a process map for cardio training. There might be a process map for the actual running plan. And there could be a fourth process map for whatever your eating plan is in those cases. And that has enough detail in that specific process map that would give me a good overview of what it is I'm supposed to be doing when as part of it. Now, when we get into even more detail, that's where SOPs start coming into play. So if we take a look at this diagram, we again have our high level value stream map here of our A, B, C, and D of I want to run a marathon, pick a marathon I want to run the marathon, train for the marathon, drink beer after the marathon in those cases. So then I have my process maps underneath that, which could be, hey, I want to strength train, weight train. I want to do cardio training, run training, and food plan. And then underneath each of those process maps, I might have SOPs in place, our standard operating procedures that walk me through exactly how I'm maybe supposed to do each specific exercise as part of my strength training plan. So SOPs have the most obscene amount of detail on it so that somebody can execute that process very, very specifically. It's more detailed information on each task that is in your process map. So you might have multiple SOPs linked on a single process map, and you also may have multiple process maps that sit underneath each box of our value stream map. So you can tell according to this, our value stream maps are up here at a very, very high level of detail. Then we go into more information, more level of detail when we get into process maps, and then into the very, very minute level of detail once we get into SOPs. So if you're going to be participating in key business process mapping with us, our value stream mapping here, That means that we are going to be sitting somewhere in between that level of value stream mapping and process mapping. Now, we may be writing some SOPs after we get done with the event, but the majority of the detail level is going to be sitting around the value stream map to process mapping level. So let's take a look at what this actually could look like if we were to bring these two together, because value stream maps in their own right have a lot of really, really great information in them, but also swim lane process maps have really great information in them as well. So if we were to try and bring some of our value stream maps together with our swim lane process maps, this is what that could actually look like. So we have our 5 to 7, in this case 6, key business processes across the top, which we would consider our value stream. Then we'll be going over each of the specific tasks that happen in each one of those key business processes. And while we are doing that, we're going to be identifying what function is responsible for each one of those tasks. So in this example, you can see we've got boxes that are listed next to function A, function B, function C, whatever functions might be applicable in your organization. Also, while we are going through that process, we might be collecting some information as to what data we might be gathering as part of that key business process, or what system are we pulling that information from, or is it being fed to as part of that key business process as well. So we can capture all that information to be able to put that on our map and be able to move forward. So just a couple examples of what the output could end up looking like in these cases. So you can better visualize where we might be going with it. So this is an example of a high level value stream map with the specific tasks underneath each one of these bigger boxes. So this happens to be for an HR organization where we mapped out in the darker gray boxes. Those were our 5 to 7 key business processes. So making sure that we were recruiting people, the jobs, and we had job descriptions for them. We had a recruiting process, so networking where we were getting possible candidates from. We had connections in place where we were making sure that we had the right profiles. We had a great hiring process moving forward. Had good skills, traits assessments in places to make sure we were getting the right candidates. We had an onboarding process to get people in the door, our new employees. We had a training process to ensure that we were getting them up to speed, a feedback process. So we knew from a performance feedback perspective, everybody knew how they were doing in the organization, and we had a recognition program as part of that. And then last but not least, in this case, was the succession planning and path planning for people who were moving into leadership, where we had succession planning, development planning, and career progression. So you can see the dark gray boxes are showing us those 5 to 7 key business processes. And in this situation, the white boxes with the gray outlines, those were the specific tasks that were happening. Now, since this was all one function, you don't see the swim lanes in this case. You just see people's names as the owners of each of those boxes. So we knew who owned each one of those steps within the process and who we needed to go to for more information. Now, added onto this, what you didn't see in the last slide was all these funky little red, yellow, and green circles that are on here. And those are on here to make sure that we understand the process health. Now, there's two sets actually on this example. The dots that are inside of the boxes are to show you what internally that group rated their process health. So green meant that it was working well today and it was close to or at optimal performance. Yellow meant that it was working, but it could use some improvements. And then red meant that it really, really needed attention or it didn't exist at all, like the process was broken or wasn't existing in those cases. So the HR team went through and ranked where they thought each one of those tasks were. And then we actually gave it to their customers as well to determine where they thought the HR group was delivering on. So it gave us some really good insight to understand where we thought we were doing well and our customers might not thought we were doing so well, or where our expectations were even. And this really helped us then go through and prioritize what we should actually be working on. And that's actually the numbers that are on the right or the left-hand side of those boxes is what the HR team thought from a priority perspective, ranking them 1, 2, or 3, and then also the customers ranking them 1, 2, or 3. So ultimately, in this case, this combination of our value stream map and a process map turned into a really great prioritization document to help us figure out where to place our resources on what projects, because we know we can't focus on every single one of these at the same time, But we can focus on the ones that were number one priority that were double reds in these cases, such as workforce planning in this situation that was something that jumped out, or development plans that was something that jumped out in this place as well. So we really learned from this to figure out what was the next thing we needed to take a look at. Now, more likely what we're going to be doing is something that I've got on the screen right here. And I know it's pretty small. You don't necessarily need to know the detail in this, just kind of understand the flow here. This is what I like to affectionately refer to as a placemat. So if you can imagine this printed on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, I love all things laminated. So once this is finished, I like to laminate these so that I can fully understand how the processes work within a company from start to finish. So in this case, this example happened to be for an energy company where across the top, you can see the key business processes of prospecting for a customer, qualifying them, negotiating their deal, executing their deal, securing supply for that deal, and then serving them and scheduling their energy, and then also billing them in these cases. So that is actually a pretty similar process, whether you're supplying somebody energy, or if it's a cable company or a cell phone company, any type of service model in these cases, that typically seems to be what the actual key business process ends up being. So we're going to go through and determine what your high level key business processes are. And then in this case, we start to get into the detail much more like the visual picture you saw earlier, where we start to identify all of the different functions that participate in these different key business processes. So you see those as horizontal swim lanes in our process map here. Now, then we mapped out our processes using all of these little task box, again, at a mid to high level in these cases. So we can fit this all on one single page, and that's important to remember there, that we don't want to get into too much detail. That's really meant for the very specific process maps and the SOPs. This is high level for our value stream map. So these are the steps that need to happen from start to finish in order from when you very first prospect a customer to when we bill them at the end of the month. So all the steps that need to happen in between there. And each of these task boxes are very strategically placed in the column of the key business process that they are part of. And then from a horizontal perspective, placed in the correct swim lane of the group that is actually performing that task. So I can very easily pinpoint any specific task that's on here, and I know exactly what key business process it falls in, and I also know what function is actually performing or supporting that task. And then very similar to the previous process, we have these red, yellow, and green circles in the lower left-hand corners that indicate the health of each one of those processes so that we better understand the health in those cases if our processes are working well, if they need help, or if they're broken. So if we need to prioritize our efforts and our resources on what we need to focus on first, we've got a pretty good indication on where we need to be focusing our time. Now, the back side of this, which is our next slide here, which we'll be getting into as well, is talking a little bit about the details that you specifically need as part of your organization that would be helpful to understand about each one of your key business processes. So for this example, we needed to understand who the owner was, what KPIs or metrics were they working on or tracking as part of it. How healthy was that overall key business process? What data points were we capturing? What systems were we using? And most importantly, what other documentation already existed to support that process? So very interestingly in this situation, if you could imagine and put the vision out there that you have this beautiful key business process map like this, on the opposite side of that placemat is this document where you can very easily click on these links. It can take you right to the process maps for each one that we have completed in those cases. So if you want more detail on specific boxes in there, you want to get more detail on how exactly do you do that strength training exercise, you can simply just click on these links. They take you to the SOPs or the process maps. They give you more detailed information. So this is really something that we are going to be working on when we come meet with you to talk about the very high level key business processes and then those high level tasks that help us to deliver on those key business processes and who is supposed to be doing what. So the best way to prepare for our sessions One, we want to make the most of our time together. So it's going to require a little bit of pre-work on your end, not too much in these cases, but make sure that you're setting aside a little bit of quiet time to think about what those high level steps would be that you would use to describe the process to an outsider. Now, I joke that I always use my mom in this situation. When I told her I was going to school to be an engineer, I'm pretty sure she thought that I was going to be driving trains for a living. So she doesn't totally get what I do in these cases, and sometimes this stuff can be a little confusing. So if I can simplify it down into 5 to 7 process steps that she understands, then I know that I did good in those cases. So she often gets phone calls from me just saying, hey, does this make sense to you? Do you get the gist of what we're doing? So what would those 5 to 7 steps be that you would use to describe what we are doing from start to finish to somebody else? What would you use to describe? The second part of this then is to think about what tasks you happen to be responsible for in each one of those steps. So we've got those 5 to 7 key business processes. What are the big things that you do underneath each one of those that provide value into the process that would very high level describe what it is that you are doing in those cases? Then once you know what those are, if there's any documentation that exists today that you think might be helpful for when we meet, make sure that you either have that on hand, you can print it out if you need to, or just be able to access it easily. I like to send myself an email with a bunch of links that has all that information in. Maybe it's already organized in a folder on Teams or SharePoint somewhere. Just make sure that you've got access to that and you know where it is in those cases so that if we do need it, it's not, 5 to 10 minutes of trying to figure out where that document is and going, I know that exists, I just don't know where it is. If you've got documentation like that, get it ready to go before we start. And then last but not least is to think about how those steps are actually working today and be objective on that. And remember, this is about continuous improvement. It's not about talking about what's going wrong and who's to blame for it and why it doesn't work, because a lot of the times these processes were developed fantastically for a situation that previously exists. But we all know that business does not stay stagnant, and we are constantly forced to adjust in these cases. So we're trying to continuously improve the process as we go and build this for what might grow on us in the future in these cases. So really think about how these steps are doing. Are they stable? Are they scalable? Are they green, yellow, or red? What's the health on them? And do you have any metrics or data to support that that might be helpful for us to understand so we can start to gauge these in the same way? So take a little bit of time before we meet and think about these things that can help us get ready to prepare for this situation. And then just come with an open mind as we start talking about these high level steps. I know it's going to be really tempting to jump into the detail, but just trust us with the process that we will eventually get to a deliverable. It's probably going to take us a little while to get there, but we will get there. Sometimes we might be in the middle of the process and you're like, just don't see how we're going to get there. I promise you, we will. So just trust us as we go through this. And if you have any questions before your meeting with us, feel free to get in contact with us and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So we are looking forward to seeing you and working with you and building out your processes moving forward. So see you in a few weeks or see you in a few days. Thanks, everyone.